Okay, so welcome to September's edition of Working in Sustainable Technology. Today we're going to be discussing carbon removal. So why this is such, this was a topic that in our last event was voted almost unanimously as the one people wanted to cover most this time. So there's been a lot of demand for this one. And why is it so important? Well, I'm sure as most of you know, whilst reducing emissions and leaving fossil fuels in the ground is probably the most important thing we can do. The problem is we've already admitted too much already, and just reducing is not enough now. We have left it too late for reducing emissions to be enough. And in order to really have a realistic chance of keeping temperature rises beneath 2 degrees, we need carbon removal, and that's almost unanimously agreed by the experts now at this point. We need carbon removal, we need it quickly, and we need it in all of its forms. So today we've got some fantastic speakers coming to share their expertise and their knowledge around the topic with you. We've got Ted Christie-Miller, who is the head of carbon removal at B0 Carbon. B0 Carbon have a platform which assesses the efficacy of carbon credits. So making sure it allows you to assess the risk behind them and assesses that each credit actually achieves or gets as close as possible to achieving a ton of CO2 removed. We've got Adam Samuel, the co-founder of Capture, whose company are innovating fantastically within the carbon removal space and looking at sequestering biomass residue into biochar and storing it in the soil, which is a great way not only of removing the CO2, but also reinvigorating the soil and having lots of kind of positive implications as a result of that. And then we've got Tom Praviti, who by day works for Supercritical, which is a platform which helps businesses measure, reduce and offset their carbon emissions, but by night is also the host of the Carbon Removal Show. He's done 14 episodes, I think, in total across 2 series. I think maybe halfway through the 2nd series of interviews with experts across the sector and across the world. So a real font of knowledge about all things carbon removal. And again, we'll pop a link in the chat to his show, because if this is a topic that interests you, please go and check that out. There's some fab episodes in there. So with no further ado, I'll hand over to Ted and enjoy.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm just going to share my screen, and I've got a few slides to show. Is that right, Sherry? Yep. Great. So first, it's worth taking you through a bit about what I want to talk about today. So first, a quick intro into B0, then discussing a bit about our approach to ratings, then going to talk about carbon removal more broadly and also our research within that, and then a quick overview of just sort of my career and how I've ended up where I am. So intro to B0. So I mean, in short, what we're trying to do is the motive of our company is to try and drastically improve really the sort of robustness of ecosystem assets. We want to really help scale the market. This is both for avoidance and removals. It's a whole of the voluntary carbon market we're looking at. And want to really improve the investability and the risk management in the market as well. And this is done by really just sort of improving the information and delivering our solutions to the market. And as an organisation, we're sort of 100 plus. I sort of can't keep track of who we're hiring, but we've sort of grown a lot over the last year. When I joined about a year ago, it was about 30. So it's been a big growth period for us. We're about 2.5 years old. The background of our founders is from finance. They used to be at Bank of America in sell-side research. And we're really sort of modelled on the ratings agencies of financial services, such as S&P and Moody's. And we're trying to bring in that language of risk into the voluntary market. And it really helps to be able to speak to those institutional investors and the people in the finance world and speak in their language when they're assessing some of these things. I'm going to quickly take you through sort of our approach to ratings as well. So what's important to us is that they are universal, transparent, and fungible. It's key for us. And as it says there, essentially what the the B0 carbon rating does is it gives our opinion on the likelihood that a given credit achieves a ton of CO2 avoided or removed. And in order to be eligible for a B0 carbon rating, there's 3 qualifying criteria. You need to have an additionality test within your methodology. You need to have a third-party auditor that looks over your numbers, and you also need to have all of the data to be publicly available. And this is just an overview of the risk factors which make up our framework. So additionality has 50% of the weighting. We have overcrediting that has 20%, and then non-permanent leakage have 10%. Reverse incentives in political environment have 5%. So that is our view of how we do the analysis for these ratings. And we've got a team of about 30 scientists that do the ratings. I think about 15 people on Earth observation that use satellite technology to track forestry patterns, and that's mainly for avoided deforestation markets. But there's a very in-depth team that do these ratings. And so, how does that sort of fit into carbon removal? So, I mean, my role is really a sort of research, ratings, and partnerships team within the company. And as it's such a new and nascent part of the voluntary carbon market at the moment, there are very few ex-post credits that are really usable in the market, mostly sort of biochar. There's a bit of DAC and a little bit of bio oil out there, but it's fairly limited at the moment. And so my job is sort of leading a team that is preparing for ratings when they can do, and sort of getting the specialties and some of those methods underpinned. And then actually what we're really doing is a lot of thought leadership, a lot of R&D work at the moment. So I'm just going to take you, for those that maybe are less familiar with carbon removal, take you through some of the methods that we're working with, and also some of the research which we've been doing and how the market's evolving as well. So first, this is sort of an overview of chemical carbon dioxide removal. Some of these people will be probably aware of. Direct air capture and carbon storage is one of the most famous of these. It sort of it removes carbon via geochemical processes and geological storage, and ambient air is passed through either a solid solvent or a liquid solvent, where the carbon then bonds to the material and is then fixed. And that is Climeworks, Carbon Engineering, Stera, Verdox, these sort of companies, so they're the ones that are doing this technology at the moment. Next up, enhanced weathering, which otherwise known as enhanced mineralization, removes atmospheric carbon geochemically, and the weathering is basically just a natural occurring process that converts tons of CO2 into minerals annually, and this process is really for enhancing it, and often it's done by mining minerals, silicate and basalt, olivine, and then they undergo a grinding process to form a powder that's then spread over large areas of soil. And this is also done to some degree in oceans as well, and that's called ocean alkalinity enhancement. It's a similar process. And then there's mineralization, which is the storage side of this, carbon in concrete, that is pretty self-explanatory, putting the carbon into concrete for long-term permanent storage. And then biological carbon dioxide removal. I mean, afforestation, reforestation is what we know as tree planting. Everyone knows what that is. And we've got bioenergy, carbon capture and storage, which essentially is biological carbon removal and geological storage. So it uses biomass in combustion to generate energy and then captures the emitted carbon for geological injection. Biochar is one of the methods that has the most capacity on the market at the moment. It's got the most ex-post credits, and it's another form of biological carbon removal, uses biomass and other organic materials, burns them in low oxygen environments, something called pyrolysis, and the carbon inside the biomass transforms to a state where it can't decay, which is known as biochar, and that's often sort of spread over soil or buried to store the carbon in the land. And then a number of others. You've got macroalgae there, wooden construction, bio-oil, soil sequestration. But if people are interested in this, we've got full explainers, interactive explainers on the B0 Carbon website. So do have a look through that. And then a quick overview of just some of the research we've been doing and some of the stat highlights. So, I mean, at the moment, the voluntary carbon market is largely emissions reductions, only 7% is removal. Within the nature segment, over half is avoided deforestation. So there's still, there's still an enormous way to go to be able to get the kind of removal capacity we want on the voluntary carbon market. But that's something that we're trying to promote this research and try to set out some solutions for that. The dominance in the analysis we've done, and we see it's likely to shift, and that by 2030 we're looking at actually a majority of the market to be renewables. That's a combination of the rise of engineered solutions and the decline of some RED plus projects. That then you've got essentially there will be a shift in the makeup of it, and so we're looking ahead with a growing carbon removals team to try and be ready to cater for that part of the market as it grows. This is a bit of analysis, so just from the task force for voluntary carbon markets, projecting 56% of BCM to be removed by 2030, which is an enormous shift. Something that I'm sure we'll go into more detail in this, but the cost of these technologies is currently very high, and there's a real need to sort of accelerate that cost curve down. And this is just a sort of overview of the way we're looking at the market. It's by no means we'll have everyone in there, but there's sort of some of the key market players and sort of the makeup that we see. And something that's interesting about the way the market is that the vast majority of credits are bought bilaterally rather than through intermediaries. It's from our assessment, it's 96% are bought bilaterally. And actually, in order to really help the market scale and to bring down that cost curve, what you need to do is harness the power of the voluntary carbon market, harness the power of those intermediaries like supercritical, for instance. We've got Tom here. This is how you are able to increase demand and to sort of really mature the market over time. And so we, in that recent report, sort of set out a three-pronged approach to how we think you can help scale this industry. First, I mean, accreditation needs to be improved. To be valuable and tradable, credits really need to demonstrate a level of integrity, and accreditation is necessary to demonstrate that feasibility and durability and viability, and to maintain the standards across this emerging marketplace. And then second, we really see ratings as crucial to this market growing in the voluntary carbon market. Because there is obviously a high price point for removals, you want to be able to differentiate yourself from the rest of the carbon credit market, and that's what we allow with our ratings. And then thirdly, in my view, probably most importantly, is we do need enormous amounts of public sector support. We've seen an amazing year in the US with vast amounts of money being put towards carbon removal, and it's a very exciting time, but we can't stop there. We really need policymakers to help de-risk these new technologies. The government in the UK, for instance, have an enormous role in bringing down the costs of solar, and we can see the same sort of cost curve come down if the right policies are in place. So that was a sort of overview of our research about zero, and then I'm not going to spend too long on this, but just take you through sort of how my background got me here. And I think before saying anything, I think it's worth noting that I was at a Climeworks conference fairly recently, and I found it fascinating that people, because it's such a new world that we're walking into, this new carbon removal industry, people are from all sorts of backgrounds. So I think it's worth noting that if you're a scientist or an engineer that is specialised in things, of course that's a good route in. But beyond that, there's people from all over, from the policy world, from consultancy. So I highly suggest you should get involved if you can. So for me, I after university worked in energy and climate policy consultancies that helping corporates navigate some of these issues. I then from there went to a think tank called Onward in Westminster and launched their energy and climate program with a major report at the beginning called Costing the Earth, which was Richard Howard from Aurora Energy, and then did a sort of number of different pieces over the sort of first year there, and then in the second year founded a new cross-party commission co-chaired by two former secretaries of state for climate, Caroline Spellman and Caroline Flint, so one on Labour, one on the Conservative side, and we had a sort of quite high density of research that year, looking at industrial decarbonisation, future tech innovation, and that's where I really started getting involved in voluntary carbon market and in carbon removal policy in particular. We had some success with our policy. We've got sort of citations in the progress report to Parliament by the Climate Change Committee, the Levelling Up White Paper, and a few others as well. So I highly suggest getting into think tanking if you can. It's a fascinating world to start a career off in. I then founded a carbon offsetting software company. This was actually on the side of Onward towards the end, and so led the outreach and sales. I ended up selling my stake to the co-founders in 2021 as I joined BeZero, but it gave me a really good tech and business side approach to looking at this market. And then I joined BeZero to be head of carbon removal, and as I discussed, leading a team of researchers and rating scientists that are focused on this sector. And we've done some of the findings I took you through there, and we considered that we did in June, and there's plenty more research coming out in the coming weeks and months, and do keep an eye out for it. And then I've gone on probably too long already, but I just a bit of I know Shuri was thinking about what sort of advice you give to people who want to get into this sector. And I mean, I personally think really starting to build your profile is an important thing to do. Twitter and LinkedIn can be useful. Go and get coffees with anyone you can. Join online communities, air miners, open air. These are really good networks to get a part of. And then start following some key newsletters like Carbon 180 and the Carbon Curve. They do some really good. And actually, the DAC Coalition have a new one out, which is good as well. This is just good to really get a good grasp of the industry and get meeting people really. But I've gone on too long, so I'll leave it there. But I'm happy to take any questions as well.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Ted. That was brilliant. And a really great walkthrough of all of the different types of carbon removal and all the bits in that. Definitely loads in there that I'd never heard of. So yeah, amazing. Thank you. And I really liked, you talking about the fact that at the Climeworks conference, there were people from all backgrounds. I think I've said on a previous session of this meetup, but within the green economy, there are jobs for everyone. It doesn't matter what background you've come from, and it's not just for the scientists and it's not just for the engineers. So yeah, it's good to hear that echoed, which is great. Thank you so much. And so Adam Samuel, co-founder of Capture, is going to talk to us now. His company are actually doing the biochar stuff that Ted just talked about. So here's a little bit more about that.
Hi, can you hear me? Yeah, fantastic. So yes, hi, thank you for that, Sherry. My name's Adam Samuel. I'm a co-founder at Capture. I'm actually on the other screen, so I'm not. It's not that I'm not looking at the camera. Just I've got the screen over here. So thank you, Cherry, Julia, and Chris for organising it, and thank you for everyone else for joining us today, and Ted for the overview. It saves me going through all of that. So so thanks for that as well. Our goal essentially as a company is to actually verify the sequestration of 1 million tons of CO2 by 2030. So that's the backdrop as to why we've got involved in this industry. So there you go. Sorry. So our journey, I wanted to kind of echo what has been said already. We have had an interesting sort of 21-year journey to get to carbon removal, but it's involved a whole load of other things. So kind of echoing exactly what you just said in regards as to how everybody has got to this situation. So back in the early 2000s, myself and my business partner, who's also my wife, we left university, set up a property company abroad in Spain. That was successful, moved on to digital consultancy as the property market crashed, and as part of that we dabbled a little bit in green investments, so solar and wind investments back in the sort of 2010-11 period. Then we took a break really from digital and got into property development for our sins and converted a house into 3 flats. So that was another steep learning curve and part of the knowledge journey, shall we say. And then we moved to Australia in 2013, set up a digital rewards startup, which we sold the assets of that to another company, which I'm still half involved with, that's created a fitness platform and a blockchain fitness token. But I guess the point really is that fulfillment and legacy were really important, and passion, and we want to leave a legacy. And so we looked around at what we could get involved in. We found a documentary, a BBC Horizon documentary from the early 2000s called Terra Preta, or Terra Preta Soils. Look it up, it's really interesting. It's essentially about that they found charcoal in the soils that they date to be around 2,000 to 7,000 years old. And essentially that is the birthplace of the biochar kind of industry, and why we're doing this. So it's been said, so I won't dwell on it, but why do we need carbon removal? Sorry, I haven't explained, but at the top we've got related songs. We love music, and so these are essentially related to the soundtrack of this presentation. It is a land of confusion. There's a lot of people that don't really get carbon removal, why we need it. You know, does it actually have to be done? Is it a clause for companies as a get out to not actually reduce emissions? No, it's been said we have to do both, and even if we do both, our path still looks pretty murky. So it's pretty important that we remove carbon dioxide if we're to achieve our temperature goals and our net zero 2050 targets. So what have we done to the earth? Well, lots, and not necessarily all for the good. So from a challenges point of view, we're addressing it from this kind of macro level. Net zero, as I said, we're potentially going to miss some of our targets. There's a lot of inaction, although there's plenty of people doing stuff, but not enough people. And there's a lot of apathy. What can I actually do? Oh, it's someone else's problem, that kind of thing. So, so we want to try and change that. We've got this crazy cost of living crisis that we're all about to embark on over the next few months, with the price of energy going through the roof. And essentially we need more solutions. What it's shown is that we've got a reliance on centralized energy systems. If you turn off Nord Stream, what happens then? And we've had a lack of investment, for example, in our gas reserves in the UK. So we're not resilient, and we do need to change that. And then finally, but nonetheless most important as well, food and crops. We've got a reliance on food imports. We don't really have a greenhouse type infrastructure and framework here in the UK. We've got crop failure globally due to floods, drought, disease, fire, etc. We've got degraded soils because we've done industrial agriculture, and we need to go back to a regen ag kind of model. And as I said, we've got this backdrop of increased cost of both energy and fertilizer. So Sean Paul can give us the light, and we need a silver lining. We need a combined, what we're creating is a combined power and biochar technology with essentially a carbon removal certificate wrapper. So you're probably thinking, well, what does that mean? So we're pretty happy with the solution that we've created. We're tying together the hardware and the software. So we're building pyrolysis kiln technology. The idea is that it's small and it's batch operated, so we can keep the cost down. That allows us to create modular and mobile type scenarios. And it allows us to empower from the grassroots upwards, rather than what's typically out there at the moment, which is high capex, continuous machines, which work sort of in a more centralized style model. And the whole idea is essentially to empower people to get involved in this industry and make that economically viable for them. And to back that up, essentially, if we're going to create carbon certificates, we have to have the data that is part of the asset that backs that. And so we're building a chain of custody audit software, which looks at the feedstock provenance, the biochar production, and the sequestration itself and where it's buried, and the carbon burden of that whole process, including transport and any energy requirements. And that means that we can stand forth and justify our price for carbon removal. So what does that actually mean, right? How does it actually work? So we take woody biomass, and you're probably thinking, well, why don't you just leave it on the ground or leave it where it's been chipped, for example? Well, the problem is the CO2 is then released when it's decayed in situ. If it's under anaerobic conditions, then it actually can turn into methane, which has a global warming potential of 20 times that of CO2. So it's not a great place to be. And so what we're doing is we're looking at that kind of low-grade material and putting it through a pyrolysis process, which Ted touched on earlier. And for those of you, if you remember the fire triangle at school, that's essentially where you need heat, fuel, and oxygen to create fire. But if you remove the oxygen, that's the pyrolysis process. And what that has is two kind of outputs. One is biochar and one is heat and electricity. So biochar is essentially the stable carbon skeleton of the original biomass. And like humans, it has a vascular system. And that vascular system gets cleaned out and essentially you're left with very, very tiny pores. So 1 gram of biochar is said to have a surface area of roughly a football field. So it's a very interesting material. And then it gets applied to land and materials, which I'll talk about a bit later. From a heat and electricity point of view, there's then the onward journey of how do we store that, which is probably for another day, but it's something that we're interested in. So benefits are really important. From a carbon perspective, for every 3 to 5 tons of biomass that you pyrolyze, you get roughly 1 ton of carbon, which is not exactly the same as biochar, because biochar is a percentage of carbon with some ash and minerals left in it. And that then converts into roughly a 2 to 3 tons of CO2 equivalent figure. It's between 2 or 3 tons because no process is exactly identical. And therefore, the key is really to look at the whole carbon burden of the process and make sure that you come out with a valid CO2 equivalent tonnage at the end of the process. The benefits of biochar are wide. We discussed it being in soil. It holds nutrients, it retains water, and it aerates the soil. From holding a nutrients point of view, that reduces fertilizer runoff, which in turn reduces the eutrophication of waterways, which is very useful for biodiversity in those waterways. And it can also be used as an additive in concrete, in insulation for its U value, and in asphalt as a decarbonisation tool. And then obviously from a heat and power point of view, there's the utilisation of stakeholders to use biomass on their own site and generate their own heat and power, which is reducing their reliance on the grid. So we haven't stopped believing. This is what we've done thus far. We've been going about 18 months. April last year, we were successful in a BASE, DAC and GGR, greenhouse gas removal, and direct air capture competition. And that led us to build a feasibility study around our technology, the market in general, and the commercialization potential of this. That's actually online if anyone wants to look it up. And then after that process finished at the start of this year, we were successful in a grant that was part funded by the European Regional Development Fund through OXLEP, which is the Oxfordshire Local Enterprise Partnership. And that's helped us build our first prototype software, which has been done, and our first prototype kiln, which is ongoing as we stand here today. So we are just another brick in the wall. There are lots of bricks to bring this all together. And I suppose from the perspective of why we're all here today, from a resources point of view, this is a huge new nascent industry, as Ted alluded to, and there's a huge amount of opportunity in a wide range of different industries. So from our perspective, in our immediate supply chain, we've got tree surgeons, foresters, woodland management who will provide the material for this process. We've got people who want heat and power, essentially, so farmers, sawmills, estates, who will become the producers and utilize our technology. We also believe that because this is nascent and new, a lot of the charcoal making kind of industry has largely died out. So we're going to need some courses on how you do this, how you pyrolyze, what all the health and safety factors are in doing this process. And then, of course, sequestering, we need the organizations that are going to utilize biochar for its different properties. So that will be, farmers and construction industry and many others. And then beyond capture, our own supply chain, the obvious ones, we're going to need academia to look at the evidence base and provide more information and more structured information and information specific to the UK. agronomists to look at what it does in soil. There's lots of evidence that it increases the soil organic carbon, which is also highly beneficial for us all. Plant trials, the fact that it holds on to nutrients means that it can increase the health and the growth potential, potentially looking at increased yields for crops. And obviously the financiers to bring in the carbon money and help a lot of these projects get off the ground. And then we need lots of advisors looking at the full supply chains of how companies can get involved with reducing and removing their emissions. Accreditors and ratings agencies, as Ted has come here today, and auditors. So we absolutely can't be judge, jury, and executioner. We need other companies to be able to look at what we're doing and make sure that it all stands up. So the future, what does this look like? Well, growth for us and partnerships. So we actually have a waiting list of people looking for our technology to actually get this on site and carbon credits today, and we have nothing to provide them as yet because we're still essentially in R&D. Nice position to be in, but it means we've got a lot of work to do. And so obviously, as soon as this starts to take off, we'll be looking at operational roles, you know, from finances, ops, sales and marketing, agronomists potentially, and data analysts. Technology scaling wise, we have to scale our kilns, which is no mean feat. And also we're looking at energy storage. We have some really interesting projects that the right type of engineers I think will get highly excited about. And they would be a lot across disciplines, so mechanical engineers, electrical engineers, chemical engineers, environmental engineers, and agricultural engineers. And then finally, software development. So we only have a prototype at the moment, but we need to build APIs, an Internet of Things connection between hardware and software, migration of data kind of scenarios, and do some machine learning and modeling around the technology that we have. So we'll need DevOps, front-end modelers, and the whole suite of software engineering team, as you would expect. So that's me. I hope that's useful, and more than happy to answer any questions in the breakout rooms later. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Adam. And again, echoes the point about there being jobs for everybody. Sounds like, you know, you'll need it takes a village to make this stuff happen, right? So yeah, exciting. And also just to say, absolutely loved your desert island discs of carbon removal. That was great. I think that's the beginnings of a West Spotify playlist starting there, maybe. Watch this space. Thank you so much. Perfect. So now on to Tom Praviti from both Supercritical and from the Carbon Removal Show.
Brilliant. Yeah, thanks for the glowing introduction, Cherry. Yeah, hopefully I can provide some, maybe not it'll be a font of knowledge in the next 10 minutes, but we'll see. And yeah, great to hear from Ted and Adam. Yeah, some really great content there. So I haven't got any slides. I thought, well, partly because I'm doing this because of the podcast, and we obviously believe in the power of storytelling and words, and so it kind of didn't really feel like it would be that useful to show you guys slides. So I'm just going to talk a bit about my journey into carbon removal, the podcast side of things, and then also what I'm doing today at Supercritical. So to start from the top, I think, like most people, you know, my career didn't start in carbon removal. My career actually started in co-working spaces and incubator programs. So I ended up, I was running a co-working company in London called Launch 22 up until about 20, that I was very much enjoyed this kind of community impact aspect, but I didn't necessarily kind of know where to go next. And I think just all manner of kind of colliding incidences made me really want to work in climate. I think that was at the time when there were the school strikes and people declaring climate emergencies, and through all sorts of conversations kind of inspired me and kind of encouraged me to want to kind of take more of a career shift into this space. And so I actually tried to start a separate business, creating what at the time I thought would be very easy to create net zero co-working spaces. And that proved quite difficult. COVID obviously was part of that difficulty, and off the back of that, actually pivoted into doing a newsletter, which got me introduced to a bunch of people within the sustainability space, and the kind of through that, I ended up having conversations with a couple of people, and I guess happening upon this idea of doing a podcast. And I'm sure many of you listen to podcasts, and many of you get lots of inspiring stories and interesting knowledge from them. And so that's kind of why I did it. I didn't do it because I wanted to become an expert in carbon removal. Actually, I did it more because I thought it might be an interesting topic, and also I wanted to learn how to podcast. And if people have got their cameras off, you put your hand up. Is anyone serious about working in carbon removal? Or yeah, I guess if you are serious about working carbon removal, put your hands up. It'd be interesting to know. And if you're not, then maybe you just want to learn a bit more, then react with another emoji. It sounds as though nobody wants to learn carbon removal. So I don't know, there's a thumbs up. There's a thumbs up. Great. Well, I also had no direct desire to work within carbon removal until I started this podcast. And the podcast itself, to give you some context, we're called the Carbon Removal Show. And as Cherry mentioned, we speak with entrepreneurs, policymakers, academics, and kind of thought leaders throughout the carbon removal space. And what we've come to realize is we're creating a podcast for people like us, myself and my co-host Emily. When we were starting out, there was lots of information, I guess, dotted around online, but it was generally quite complex. It was usually deeply academic reports. And so we found that we were starting to make a podcast for people like us that were kind of generally kind of climate interested, maybe working in it in some capacity, and then wanted to upskill our knowledge in this kind of more technical area. And so season 1 of the show is very much kind of catered to that audience. It's very much building the story for what is it, why do we need it, what are the some interesting stats to be aware of. Carbon removal, as Ted mentioned, is very much in its nascent state. I think last year there was close to, and I'm talking specifically about carbon removal as opposed to kind of avoidance based like offsets, for example. So kind of our podcast looks kind of exclusively at that. But you can look at stats where potentially around 500,000 tons of credits for carbon removal were purchased last year, and maybe 10% of that would be ex post, as Ted would say, actually happening today. Others are more for offtake agreements in the future, because these plants, these projects, these initiatives just haven't been set up yet, as Adam has mentioned. And so it's just been a fascinating journey to come and really understand that. And I would highly recommend, if anyone is either curious about the space or more curious about working in the space and developing the knowledge a bit more, there's lots of information online. There's lots of reading materials that I'm sure Adam and Ted have, but then also there's a podcast. So if you prefer listening via audio and you're an auditory learner, then do give us a go. The podcast is also something that's led me into my kind of day job, which is working at Supercritical. So Supercritical, we are, our North Star, our mission is to scale carbon removal. And we do that through supporting businesses if they would like to on a kind of footprinting journey, where we'll measure their footprint as an organization. We'll also work with them to set long-term targets. If they'd like to set their own net zero target, for example, we'll work with them on a reduction strategy. And then we'll also then, in kind of our final stage, is work with them to invest in and purchase portfolios of carbon removal. That's been a fascinating journey for me. I've only been working at the company for about 6 months now, but have learned a huge amount on the commercial side of things, what it is that's making companies purchase this, what's making them kind of steer clear of it, or what concerns might they have on the space at the moment. General sentiment is that lots of these technologies still haven't necessarily made it onto third party. So the likes of a B0 is greatly appreciated. And there's just loads I could go on about, but I really kind of wanted to just finish up with a couple of like learnings that I've picked up over the last few years of really kind of engaging in the space. I haven't got a technical background. I don't have a degree actually at all, but I also don't have a degree in anything that's I guess climate related or engineering related. And I would echo what others have said. This very much is an industry in a space where there is so much diversity of voice and thought, and that needs to continue to happen. For the podcast, we actually went to a big UK conference on greenhouse gas removal by an organization called Core, who Adam may actually be working with. And there was such an interesting mix of individuals that were speaking there. Young people, kind of serious academics that have been thinking about this for 20 years, lawyers. So there really isn't it's really not an industry that you should kind of be, I guess, feel like you're not credible or able to go into. There are, interesting ways you can get into the space if you haven't got kind of like a climate background per se, mine included. But I would definitely echo that. I would also echo that we need as much involvement as we can get in this space. As mentioned, like the scaling challenge is pretty immense. I think between now and 2050, we need to scale from, for carbon removal specifically, again, something like 500,000 tons a year of kind of fired to 10 billion. And that is, I guess, something like a 20,000x increase over the next 30 odd years, which is faster than any industry I think has ever grown ever before, or at least needs to happen at that pace. And so the more people that get involved, the better. And one more thing I would say is, interestingly, like, people think of the space as being very new, and being one that's only kind of recently popped up. It's kind of felt as though it's an industry that's exploded over lockdown and kind of and people are only really becoming aware of it. And I think the earliest real kind of serious work on this space, or at least literature on it, that's more publicly available, would have been if they kind of mention carbon removal and some forms of it, mainly one called bioengineering with carbon capture and storage, but that's another story. But interestingly, when I went to the Science Museum, which is doing who are doing a piece, they have a small exhibit on carbon removal. So if anyone's in London and wants to check it out, definitely do so. I think it's still on for the end of this month. I went to the Science Museum and came across someone called Dr. Klaus Lackner, who I'd been aware of, but I wasn't so aware that he actually came up with this early concept of a mechanical tree, which is kind of, I guess, an earlier version of direct air capture, back in the, I think, late 90s. And so there's been an interesting journey from kind of being in labs and probably being this piece of knowledge that only 5 people had once upon a time to where it is today, and hopefully where it will go in the future. So I'll leave it at that. So there's lots more to do in the space, and would encourage anyone to get involved.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing that, Tom, in your journey. And I think, like you said, should give some confidence to people who perhaps don't come from the most obvious of backgrounds to transition into the sector, that there's a route for everybody. So that's great. And that piece about the scaling challenge and the growth required, frightening, yet very exciting. So a shocking figure for me, and I'm sure for many other people.